What is the deal with sexism in comedy? In order to understand this, we first need to understand the concept of everyday intersectional sexism, using our friend Prison Mike here as an example. The everyday element of everyday sexism just means that it is a part of your everyday life. Intersectional means something that affects your overlapping identities. So that can include race, gender, class, sexuality, and so much more. And of course, we've got good old sexism, which is discrimination based upon gender. It's difficult to find hard statistics about gender discrimination in comedy. However, there was a 2017 case study of stand-up comedians in Chicago across 18 different showcases over the course of 10 months, which found that although women and non-binary people comprise nearly half of the pool of comedic talent, nearly 2/3 of the bookings were given to men. Despite this dearth of hard numerical evidence, however, the circumstantial evidence of gender discrimination has not escaped the public. And this issue has been brought up to our friend, the most famous comedian of all time, Mr. Jerry Seinfeld. Let's see what he thinks about it.
Fair enough.
But there were a lot of things about comedians and cars in the beginning. The first 10 I did, I think, were all white males. And people were writing all about that, which
That's part of the reason why I asked. People had tweeted at me when I said I'm interviewing with Jerry Seinfeld. Okay, ask him about their gender diversity on the show.
Yeah, I mean, people think it's the census or something. I mean, this has got to represent the actual pie chart of America. Who cares? It's just funny. You know, funny is the world that I live in. You're funny, I'm interested. You're not funny, I'm not interested.
Okay.
And I have no interest in gender or race or anything like that, but everyone else is kind of with their little calculating, is this the exact right mix? You know, I think that's, to me, it's anti-comedy. It's anti-comedy.
Some of you watching this video might agree with Jerry here. Funny is funny, and that should be the top criteria when choosing comedians. But before you take a declarative stance on this issue, I urge you to look at it from a few other perspectives. Israeli-American comedian Alex Powers describes stand-up as a vestige of blatant misogyny. Similarly, Leah Delaria, a queer female comedian who you might recognize from Orange is the New Black, believes that stand-up is the last bastion of homophobia and sexism. Let's give these quotes some context. The lack of diversity in stand-up comedy is institutionalized, and it goes far beyond the comedians themselves. White men represent an overwhelming percentage of club owners, producers, promoters, and booking agents. Although they have decreased significantly in public popularity since the 1990s and early 2000s, diversity spots are still prevalently used both formally and informally in the world of stand-up comedy. For those of you who are unfamiliar, the purpose of a diversity spot within a comedy showcase is to give the illusion of diversity within a show primarily comprised of white men by giving one slot away to a woman or a comedian of color. Despite the veneer of inclusivity, it probably won't surprise you when I say that I do not think that diversity spots should persist. This practice flies in the face of what Jerry said earlier about how funny is funny and how counting how many of each type of person you have in a show shouldn't matter. So if any of your local clubs are still using this fundamentally discriminatory practice of diversity spots, let them know that you don't view women and people of color in comedy as sideshows to the quote-unquote real comedians. Or, as our good friend Seinfeld put it, let them know that...
Oh, this really pisses me off, but go ahead. Really pisses me off.
Now let's talk about the relationship between sexist joke telling and sexual harassment and assault. It's a fun topic, I know. Unfortunately, though, we need to broach this subject in order to understand the most severe consequences of sexism in comedy. Let's start with the easier part of that equation. Sexist jokes. Male comedians and audience members are more likely than females to find sexist and homophobic jokes to be funny. Men are also more likely than women to find sexist humor to be appropriate for the workplace. And when we say workplaces, we're not just talking about comedy clubs, but all workplaces in the US. And although some amount of sexual harassment exists in every workplace, there is a special case when it comes to stand-up comedy. Most comedians' status as freelance workers in clubs and other informal venues doesn't provide a structure of protection or recourse when harassment takes place. In fact, many comedians who experience harassment fear retaliation if they speak up or defend themselves. Super famous and much beloved Black female comedian Tiffany Haddish wrote in her memoir that she was constantly defending and battling against sexual advances made by men in the stand-up comedy industry. She said she was only treated like a colleague once she had established that she was not willing to trade sexual favors for stage time or other career advancement. And Tiffany's experience is not an isolated one. It is reflective of the experiences of countless other female comedians who are less established and secure in their careers and therefore feel that they must remain silent. So where do these two extremes connect? That would be under the umbrella of the prejudiced norm theory. Here's an overview of what that theory means. For people who already have a propensity to be high in prejudice, exposure to disparaging humor primes the mind, both socially and psychologically, to subsequently tolerate more prejudice and discrimination in future events. Hobden and Olson conducted studies that demonstrated this effect. They found that reciting jokes that disparaged lawyers caused participants in the study to report more negative views of lawyers. This effect was also replicated among Canadians who recited jokes about Newfoundlanders, also known as Newfies, and subsequently reported more negative beliefs about people from that province. There are two prevailing theories about why the study subjects reported these increased negative beliefs against the subjects of their jokes. The first is self-perception theory, which means that the participants may have used their recitation of disparaging jokes to inform their perception of themselves as having stereotypes and negative attitudes about the disparaged groups. The second possible reason is cognitive dissonance theory, which means that participants may have changed their comments about having negative attitudes toward the disparaged groups to align with their earlier jokes in order to reduce cognitive dissonance. And while we can't say for sure which of these two reasons is correct as to why these prejudices increase, what we do know is that this phenomenon of prejudiced norms extends to racist, homophobic, and sexist humor. Exposure to these types of jokes upholds and reinforces societal power imbalances and generates hostility toward women, people of color, and the LGBTQ community. So what can you do to combat everyday intersectional sexism like this in stand-up comedy? Whether you personally are a comedian or you're just a big fan of comedy, the answer remains the same. Vote with your feet and with your dollars. There's a direct correlation between an increased diversity in comedy and a decrease in discriminatory practices. So don't produce or consume your comedy mindlessly. I challenge you to support not only an array of comedians, but a diverse group of people at every level of the institution of comedy. Club owners, promoters, booking agents, look at who is behind the scenes and the practices that they are using. And if you see something that you don't like, don't support it. Be vocal about it. And if you personally work in the comedy industry, be conscious about who you work with. Don't forget that a comedy show is still a workplace, and your conscious and unconscious biases affect the way people are treated. A million thanks to any of you who watched this all the way to the end. If you feel like you learned something from watching this video, please like, comment, share, or tell your friends what you've learned IRL. Thanks for watching.